Honestly, it was the little things. I knew we had nicer cars than average, a bigger house, went on more trips, etc. But I thought everyone's refrigerators had wood-paneled cabinet doors, for example. We had a Sub-Zero built-in refrigerator and freezer. The first time I saw a metal fridge I thought it was weird, and I thought it was even weirder that the fridge and freezer were combined. But then I got really jealous because you could put magnets on it. I also thought everyone had a central vacuum system where you can sweep dirt into a little hole under the cabinets by the floor and it sucks it up. We had these little holes all over, in every room. Stuff like that. Probably a weird example, but growing up all of our dishes were made of fine china, Waterford glassware, etc. And I just thought that's what plates and stuff were made of because we didn't have anything else. Then one time I went to a friend's house for dinner and we ate on colored plastic plates and non-matching plastic cups. I just thought that was the weirdest thing ever and asked why we were eating with camping dishes. I myself am not rich, but I have an uncle who is very well off. So one of my not rich aunts was complaining about her car acting up on her. Well, my cousin from the rich family was listening and got really confused. So he just asked her, well, why don't you just get rid of it and go buy another one? This kid was probably 13 or so at the time and had no concept of not enough money. He couldn't understand why you wouldn't just go get a new something if your old something didn't work. My parents paid in full for my $60,000 per year college tuition. I was always grateful for that, but it wasn't until the post-grad reality of my friends working to pay off their student loan debt while I was able to directly pursue my professional goals that I truly realized the advantage that I had from my parents' wealth. I had always known we were well off, but it wasn't until after college that I truly appreciated that, I guess. I hope I can pay them back for that someday. I was pretty poor as a kid but lived in a wealthy city, so most of my friends were quite well off. One time my friend's dad took us to a comic book convention and he bought me a $25 book just because I was looking at it and seemed to like it. It absolutely boggled my mind that someone would spend $25 on me for no occasion and without agonizing over the decision. I feel bad having said this while joining a friend on a road trip up into the mountains at his brother's house. There was slow as balls internet at the house we were going to and the connection dropped frequently. I didn't have my car with me since I was on a road trip with someone else at the time. This was also before personal Wi-Fi was a thing, and my cell phone at the time was a state-of-the-art brick phone from Nokia, thus no hotspot. If there's any way I could borrow a car to hop into town for internet tomorrow, that would be awesome. Friend, well, my brother uses his car every day and I'm using mine to go to that event we talked about. That's fine. Is it okay if I just use his extra car? Awkward silence, until... Friend, he just has that one car. To never discuss the affordability of things within a family. I thought it was totally taboo. Which isn't to say I got everything I wanted growing up. I was an obsessively frugal kid, but I was never denied something on the basis of we can't afford that. I was pretty shocked in elementary school when my friend's mom told her they couldn't afford to buy something. I guess in my mind it was impolite for parents to talk about money issues with kids, and it hadn't yet dawned on me that sometimes that's unavoidable. I lived overseas for a year when I was in high school and attended an international school where, though my family was decidedly middle class in the US, and my dad was being paid several times more to work abroad than he had been at home, I'm fairly certain my family were the least well off in the entire school. None of these kids ever seemed to realize how fabulously wealthy they were. A few examples. Several boys from North Korea. I don't know exactly how high up in the political world of the DPRK you need to be allowed to send your children abroad for an education, but these kids showed up to school in brand new Benzes, for a start. One friend of mine lived in a luxury high-rise in the single richest enclave of the city where I lived. His parents lived on the 16th floor, each floor was a single unit. He lived on the 17th floor in his own unit. He had his own live-in maid and driver as well. Another friend's parents ran the largest import-export company in the country. He had 2 bodyguards, and was driven around in his own armored, bulletproof SUV. The windows were 2-inch thick and didn't roll down. I attended his birthday party, which was on his dad's 180 super yacht. My family was broke as hell, but my mom was, and still is, a teacher at this really nice private school, which was the only reason my brother and I could attend. Everyone's parents were doctors and lawyers, you get the idea, but why brother and I were being raised by a single mom who had just relocated. We were living in a trailer park in the middle of nowhere for the cheap-ass rent. We didn't always know when the next meal was coming. One day, during lunch, the kids noticed that all I have is a peanut butter sandwich and a tiny bag of pretzels. One dude says, "Wow, you must really not be hungry." Since I was 6 and just as clueless to any other lifestyle as he was, I just straight up told him we don't have any more food. I had to explain it a couple of times before he realized. Lunch bro sheepishly asks if I would like some of his food. That orange and baggie of Cheetos were the start of a now 20-year-long friendship. Through the entirety of elementary school, I would buy ice cream for my class on Fridays at lunch. The money came from flipping Pokemon cards, paper jewelry, and of course, mostly from my dear old dad. It doesn't seem like much, but we all came from a very poor rural town with one store and one school. Our playground at school was a stretch of coarse pavement. It was like the 60s and the 90s. My dad had just started up his own machine shop in town which employed 10 or so. My slight business sense as a kid coupled with my dad's business sense made us rich. Everyone would call us boss man, which is probably where I began realizing that being a boss man wasn't the norm. My dad taught me a lesson after he realized I was spending all my money on the other kids. If you want to make a lasting impression, let's really give something back and fix up that old playground. My dad's machine shop then produced and installed an entire playground system for our school at no cost. It was that day I knew what it meant to be a good man and that I wanted to be just like my dad. What's funny is that I wanted to be absolutely nothing like him once I hit the teenage years. Now, I'm a grown man and a splitting image of my dad in the flesh as well as in character. I appear to have gone off on a tangent. I'll stop the story here. Was poor growing up, and most of my friends were poor/middle class. There was this one dude who drove a shitty, falling apart beater car. He was always hustling to and from work, trying to make a buck to afford repairs for his car. We all thought he was lucky just to have a car. One night, after we had been friends for a while, he invited a bunch of us over to his house. Even offered to pick us all up, since no one else had our own wheels. Imagine our surprise when we rolled up into the ritziest neighborhood in our area. Dude lived in a fucking mansion. Indoor pool, elevator, the whole 9 yards. We were flummoxed. Someone said, "Dude, we had no idea you were rich." His answer, "I'm not rich, my parents are, they worked very hard to get that way." At first we felt bad for him, fucking filthy rich parents, and dude is working his ass off to afford a beater? Now I get it though. My parents are very well off. When I was growing up that wasn't the case, though. My dad was working and doing his master's part-time and my mom stayed at home. We lived in a very small condo. My mom always tells a story about my much wealthier relatives coming over with their son. He ran around the whole house and came back so confused. He asked my mom and dad where the rest of the house was. Anyways, the point. My parents are quite well off now. I'm older and don't live at home anymore, but I have a much younger sister who does. Watching how growing up with money has made her is painful. She is incredibly spoiled, entitled, and quite frankly, a brat. Father was a successful chemical engineer/manufacturer and private pilot. I spent my childhood in a gated flying community with a fully functioning airport. Not only did we have a garage full of your everyday vehicles, we also had an airplane hangar full of classic cars that my dad enjoyed restoring, World War II-era warbirds, as well as the modern twin-engine planes he used to fly to business meetings. We owned property in Nantucket and St. Martin and were constantly taking extemporaneous vacations. John Travolta would walk over from time to time and shoot the shit with my dad in our hangar up until he made Pulp Fiction and was slingshot back into relevancy. I remember having play dates with his son, Jet. Was also family friends with well-known NASCAR drivers and would spend a lot of time over at their mansions hanging out with their kids, driving around on golf carts and shooting paintball guns. Everyone I knew had airplanes, nice cars, big homes, and what seemed like an endless supply of wealth. That was my normal. When I was about 4 years old, I made a new friend at school and was invited to spend the afternoon over at his house. It was an eye-opening experience to say the very least, and when I returned home, still very confused, I remember saying something along the lines of, "Mommy, they live in a really small house and they don't have an airplane hangar." My mother was slightly horrified at the realization that this was my reality and had to explain to me that not everyone has the same things that we have. Life has changed a lot for me since the 90s. When I moved away for college, my dad suffered a series of mini-strokes which subsequently caused progressive dementia. Towards the end, he couldn't even tell you what year it was. My father passed away in January, and I've been spending a lot of time recently looking through old photo albums and listening to stories. Maybe that's why I felt compelled to share all of this with you guys. Being rich is nice, don't get me wrong, but I would give it all back in a heartbeat just to spend a little more time with the dad I used to know, the man who was the master of his own universe. There was still so much to learn from him, but what I'm left with are the cherished memories of my childhood that will forever put into perspective just how lucky I really was. I thought every family had staff. We had a chef, gardener, chauffeur, 2 nannies, handyman/errand guy, took care of the house, picked up dry cleaning, bought supplies, washed the dogs, handled maintenance and repairs, and 2 maids. These were full-time and several lived with us. We had a host of part-time staff as well. When I went to college, I was shocked by how everyone took care of themselves so well, when I barely knew how to tie my own shoelaces. My private school had many Forbes 500 billionaire families, kids of world leaders, and general global establishment types. If we ever needed something anywhere, someone's parent or relative or friend would have a connection. I just assumed that's how the world worked. Money was always just an afterthought. Nobody ever asked anyone how much something cost. If you just liked something, you got it. Again, interacting with regular people in college was a huge eye-opener. Respect. Everywhere I would go, either with my family or friends or their families, we were treated with what I understand now is a ridiculous amount of respect. It's hard to explain this one, but I think others in the same situation understand. Oh, growing up I knew my family, an extended family, was better off than others once high school came around, but it didn't really sink in until college. My parents immigrated from Iran to the US, I was a little kid, and didn't have anything. My parents had engineering degrees, civil and computer, but my father wasn't allowed to work in our home country because he studied in the West. When we came here they didn't speak English so couldn't work in their profession either. My mom stayed home with my brother and me, and my father worked several jobs. He saved up, along with a bit of money that final was unfrozen, and started a small business. It grew very rapidly, but my parents didn't really change their own lifestyle. Since I was too young to really know what money is spent on when we were poor, it didn't really occur to me that we became rich. I just assumed this is what everyone in America did, the American dream, and that everyone else was like this. Starts poor and then can afford all sorts of stuff. It didn't help that my middle school and high school were very split between rich and poor, so I figured the latter group was just in the process. I always heard college was expensive and some people could afford it, or that their parents had to save up or the kid had to get a job. I thought it was $1 million per year. I figured that seemed like something people couldn't afford. I based that on thinking that the lower class made $1 million per year, so spending a year's wage on 1 year of college would be unreasonable. When I found out the average salary was less than my brother would spend partying in a weekend in college. Also allowances growing up, I never had one and everyone else did, so I figured they were all rich. Then one day I found out this girl I was seeing, end of high school, had an allowance of $50 per month, and it blew my mind. To my parents' credit, we immigrated to the States with nothing and they built a business that was successful. Also raised us very frugal. My dad still drives a 2006 Jeep Liberty and my mom a 2009 Ford Expedition. My brother and a few cousins love spending though. Edit. Turns out the Liberty is a 2001 and the Expedition is 2003. They taught us to be very disciplined and financially savvy. I worked my ass off to go down the route of being a physician and on the side started a business. They made sure they didn't help me financially so I could learn how it was to grow a business. Fast forward several years and it became successful enough that I focused on the business instead of being in medicine. I'm not far wealthier than they are and plan on giving the same type of discipline to my children. One of my best friends, whom I met in college, is very similar. His parents owned a multi-million-dollar company, and throughout school he had to have a job and paid for everything himself. One thing I've learned in life is that anyone who is well off to any degree believes the following. They are middle income. They are not rich, because they know people substantially more wealthy than themselves. Only the unemployed have money problems. Everyone else earns enough to live on because the world is fair as long as you work hard. I grew up in one of the poorest areas in my state, being looked upon as the rich boy because my dad was a teacher. People living in this area almost exclusively were unemployed or working factory jobs. Little did they know that my father gave most of his pay to the church, leaving us worse off than some of the kids who thought I was rich. Despite this, I knew I was lucky because I was never hungry, always had a roof over my head, even if it was a cheap and nasty rental, and did reasonably well at Christmas, multiple presents instead of just the one. Later in life I found myself working at a bank in their head office alongside people earning very healthy six-figure salaries, who had never set foot anywhere near an average income suburb, who were all convinced that they were average, that they worked hard for their money, and that their life wasn't that easy. Bullshit on all three counts. I found it incredibly difficult to not scream at these people, particularly when often their job was to try and figure out ways to profiteer off of people earning significantly less than themselves. My family isn't filthy rich, but my mother and stepdad both are very wealthy. I have a lot of trust fund kid friends whose families own multiple houses all over the world. That is filthy rich to me, which my family is not. They pay $60,000, and it's really $45,000. I just looked it up. The year for my little sister's private school, and that is first grade through sixth, to give you somewhat an idea, I guess, of my parents' income. My mother always tells me about the time I was about 5 years old and I went over to a friend's house. I came home extremely confused and upset about how small my friend's house was. It was a 3-bedroom/2-bath. It literally never occurred to me that people lived in houses that tiny, and it blew my 5-year-old mind. My friend shared a bedroom with one of her sisters too, and I had never met siblings who had to share a room. I remember feeling sorry for her. I really hope I didn't say anything to my poor friend, but I don't remember. My father was a tightwad, so not until later did I grasp wealth. Traveling. I traveled a lot. Cabo every year for the Black and Blue Marlin tournament, Vegas 4 to 5 times a year, Boston Winterfest every year for my birthday, Jazz Festival in Copper Mountain every year. My weekly food expenditure was around $900, but I got free room service in Vegas and Cabo. I always tipped well, so I got a lot of free drinks and special after-hour privileges. I got free places to stay everywhere I went. I never paid for a room in Vegas, and I always had a hot tub suite. I never took my cars to the shop, the mechanic came to my house. Because I tipped so well. I always got served first, and my food was always perfect. Opportunities, lots. That there was no poverty. I grew up in a wealthy family. Our extended family was wealthy. I lived in a very rich suburbs where all my friends were wealthy. It just seemed normal to me. My mom is a bleeding heart liberal, so when I got to be about 10, she started taking us to places where they have abject poverty. The Bahamas, parts of Mexico where kids hounded you on the beach, Jamaica, places in Eastern Europe where you could see slums from the hotel. It made me truly appreciate how blessed I was. In my late 20s I went through a really dark period of being broke and depressed. My family refused to help me financially, and I had to work 80 to 85 hours a week and couch surf for almost a year till I got back on my feet. No, it wasn't drugs or alcohol either. When you're poor, it changes your whole perspective on life. I'm glad my mom showed me the other side of being rich and the struggles of people who are either considered blue-collar or middle class. Every day is a struggle. You can just write a check or charge something and not care. It's a totally different mindset. So thank you, Mom, for not letting me be a stuck-up, rich cock-knuckle.